We are going to focus on natural substances with antidepressant action and specifically with scientific evidence. First of all, I wanted to focus on royal jelly. Royal jelly is a natural and beneficial product that comes from the hive, uniquely made by the bee with its own secretions. Here you see that there is a substance. There are reports from studies that provide some scientific evidence for royal jelly, especially for its main active ingredient, which we will discuss later, 10-HDA. Well, royal jelly, as you know, is the only food that the queen bee consumes, which is why she is more fertile, longer lived, and larger, right? And royal jelly is an extraordinary tonic. It is a perfect remedy for those who have a depressive disorder, and particularly for those that are seasonal. Well, I did want to make a clarification, and that is that not all royal jellies are the same. I wanted to discuss the three aspects that determine a good quality of royal jelly. First of all, this is the origin. In my opinion, it has to be of European origin. There are many royal jellies marketed from Eastern origins. In China, in some countries, and on many occasions, the hives are made of plastic. Plastic is a bisphenol A, therefore it is an endocrine disruptor. So here you see a press report on how that there is competition in the same way like happens with honey, so that the jelly is of inferior quality compared to other European countries like Spain. Thank you. I say ours, not because we are in Spain, but I know that we have an audience from other countries. Secondly, it would be the organoleptic quality of royal jelly. Fresh in the fridge would be ideal, but since what is mainly marketed are ampules, I recommend that you visualize the ampule and see if it forms a lump, especially when we are in the cold. We need to shake the ampule. That would already be an organoleptic quality that would define good quality royal jelly. If I see the royal jelly very liquid, especially when it's cold, I would be a little suspicious in the sense that it may have been mixed with fructose or with other components. And lastly, the marker active principle would be an unsaturated fatty acid, 10-hydroxydecenoic acid, 10-HDA, the 10-HDA. Itself is the name of this acid, which is a quality marker that indicates whether it is biologically active and its degree of freshness and preservation, and it should be very close to 2%. That is to say, below 1.8% would be I would not recommend it, and 2% would be a fresh royal jelly of higher quality. Jellies may appear that are around 5 or 6%. That would indicate to me that it is not fresh royal jelly, but rather freeze-dried royal jelly, or a mixed royal jelly, both fresh and freeze-dried. Well, and then we would enter with many products, many natural substances, both medicinal plants and dietary supplements that are susceptible or very interesting for treating depression. This is a paper, it is a report where you can see the vast majority of them. Well, there are many, so you know that you have a lot of tools to treat depression from a holistic perspective. Totally natural. I will only focus on this. This is a masterclass. It should be covered in depth in the Supplementation Masters program. And it will be, and I will focus on 4 of them, basically, based on what happens. And it is that when I consume protein intake in many various forms of such as different types, including but not limited to, for example, meat, fish, and eggs. In some parts of these protein foods, some of them are very rich in an amino acid called tryptophan. Tryptophan, when it enters the cell through an enzyme called tryptophan hydroxylase, is converted into 5-HTP. I know that all of you have heard of 5-HTP, 5-hydroxytryptophan, which later, through another decarboxylase, will be converted into serotonin. Its active form, 5-HT, which will be released into the synaptic space to interact with the next neuron to perform this neurotransmitter function, in this case of feeling of happiness. Serotonin, when it performs its function, must be reabsorbed by transporters that recapture it for reuse. And there are also other enzymes like MAO, which is monoamine oxidase, that are responsible for the breaking it down. Therefore, this cycle is what I will basically follow with the use of natural substances, and I mainly want to focus on 4 of them. on tryptophan as the first precursor of all, 5-HTP, and the main source would be griffonia, the seed of this plant that has a very interesting, very important richness in 5-HTP, is the main source of 5-HTP. I will basically focus on the plant, let's say, as a reference for depression, which would be Hypericum perforatum, St. John's wort, and also on a plant that has gained a lot of strength, which would be saffron. Therefore, with these four, I will also give you a note regarding essential oils, but basically these four elements are what I will reference. Firstly, with tryptophan, which is an essential amino acid that I incorporate from food. On one hand, all the metabolic pathways. On one hand, the tryptophan that I incorporate already in free form in a good percentage will bind to proteins, for example, like albumin. On the other hand, the most important metabolic pathway is the one where tryptophan will convert into 5-HTP, and from here it will convert into serotonin, and the active principle resulting from its metabolism, which is what I will measure. To see the activity at the level, it is what I can measure analytically, okay? I should also mention that from serotonin, melatonin can be formed, which, as we saw in the old masterclass, is the hormone par excellence that regulates our circadian cycles, especially sleep, okay? And also, therefore, both serotonin and melatonin. Since melatonin has important implications in sleep, depression, and anxiety. That is to say, in other words, this is the specific area where we are planning to carry out our operations. But additionally, I will also delve into and explore in more detail another degradation pathway of tryptophan, which we are currently observing to have a significant and noteworthy implication in the context of depression, and this is known as the kynurenine pathway, leading also, IDOS, to the formation of niacin, which is a secondary pathway for the formation of vitamin B3. This imbalance in metabolic pathways will also have a significant implication in depression. Well, there are times when you ask us who handle all this. What is the difference between tryptophan and 5-HTP? Well, first of all, I remind you that the tryptophan I incorporate with protein-rich foods will convert into 5-HTP, and this will convert into serotonin, and from here, melatonin will also be formed. Well, if I rely on tryptophan-rich supplements, we need to know that the absorption of tryptophan competes with other 5 amino acids, such as it needs an active transporter, competes with these amino acids. And therefore, if one enters, the other will not. Therefore, when I take a tryptophan-rich supplement, among other things, I need to know if I can take it with food or not. Also, it is important to note that you should know that a good part of the use of tryptophan will be used significantly for albumin to perform its action effectively, and also that tryptophan needs, in the same way as for its assimilation, active transporters in order to successfully cross the blood-brain barrier efficiently. This is also an aspect quite important. In contrast, 5-HTP, which is already determined by the conversion of tryptophan, has better intestinal absorption because it does not compete with other amino acids, and therefore I can even afford to take it with food. It crosses the blood-brain barrier much more easily and avoids the conversion of an enzymatic step, which, as always, enzymatic steps are somewhat limiting. Therefore, I have already taken that step. In fact, only 5-HTP would have the intrinsic ability to form both melatonin and serotonin, as well as dopamine and all these neurotransmitters. The pathway I wanted to mention earlier, here I have provided this reference to a new theory about depression, a balance of mood between the nervous and immune systems with regulation of serotonin, kynurenine, and the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis. First of all, I would like to mention that the most interesting metabolic pathway for me to have an adequate mood that is not to be depressed would be the metabolic pathway by which tryptophan hydroxylase is converted into 5-HTP and therefore is converted into serotonin. This would be the most appropriate pathway. However, it could happen that Basically, stress and certain metabolites that stress activates and promotes act on receptors. Tipotol, basically, those that I have in the non-specific immune system, in such a way that what they are going to activate are two enzymes. The TDO, which is tryptophan 2,3 dioxygenase, is a hepatic enzyme that regulates extracellular tryptophan. And fundamentally, it will activate the IDO, indoleamine 2,3 dioxygenase, which is an intracellular extrahepatic enzyme expressed in immune system cells, especially in specific ones like macrophages, also in cells of the system, basically in immune system cells, the central nervous system, and in inflamed tissues, in such a way that it will lead me to a certain metabolites, some of them neurotoxic, especially under conditions when there are infections with certain vaccines, basically when there are elevated levels of stress, cortisol due to stress, elevated levels of inflammatory cytokines, certain foods, basically those that are pro-inflammatory, which will also cause intestinal dysbiosis or excessive intake of tryptophan. Under these conditions, they will lead me to this certain metabolic pathway where components will be activated, as I mentioned before, neurotoxic ones that will ultimately lead me to a chronic low-grade inflammation in the neurocentral system. Therefore, we are currently seeing that in addition to the classical pathway of serotonin formation, we need to take into account avoiding. Because although this metabolic pathway, it is indeed very important because it is a pathway as an effective mechanism for modulating the immune system's response. We have also seen that it is already considered an essential step in the pathophysiological process of depression. All of this should also be explained and will be explained in the corresponding module related to depression or with system alterations. Emotional. The scientific evidence we have with 5-HTP, I always refer to high-grade evidence. In this case, I have looked for the meta-analyses and systematic reviews that exist as of very recently at the time of preparing this masterclass, or what this masterclass aims to be. There is little evidence, some of it, and the evidence that exists is a bit old, it is true. That the high-grade evidence is relatively scarce, only four results in total. And although the high-grade evidence is somewhat limited, for example, the Medline E+ page says that there is some evidence, some studies that are indicating to you, of course, because they are lowering this rigor with scientific evidence, that are telling you that 5-HTP can also be very effective in combating depression. Especially, I have put here a scientific study. A study, comparative scientific study of the efficacy of 5-HTP with fluoxetine, which, as I mentioned before, is the active ingredient in well-known drugs like Prozac, where the study concludes that the therapeutic efficacy of 5-HTP is considered very similar to that of fluoxetine. Therefore, evidence, in this case from a study conducted in 2012, it is very interesting.